Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Net. We're back to episodes. This is the first one of 2024. It's the February the 16th, 2024 edition. And today we're going to discuss security and a specific event that Cloudflare mitigated. I'm João Tomé, based in Lisbon, Portugal, and with me I have, for the first time in this show, our CSO, Chief Security Officer, Grant Bourzikas. Hello, Grant. How are you?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for having us on today, or having me on today. This is very exciting.
It's your first time. Where does this show or podcast find you? Where are you based?
So I'm based in St. Louis, Missouri, right in the middle of the United States.
So central time in a sense.
I'm in Central Time. Yep, the area between the coasts that everybody forgets about.
True. For those who don't know, can you give us a little bit of your background? How many months you're at Cloudflare at this point?
Yeah, so I've been here 10 months. So I started in April. It's been a super exciting venture in the 10 months. I've seen a lot of fun, exciting things come out of Cloudflare. But I think prior to Cloudflare, I've been a CISO for 20 years. I've spent time in online brokerage, the largest global bank in the world, probably the most innovative global bank in the world. I spent time in power nuclear. So I've done this a long time. I'm a practitioner by trade. So it's fun to come here and actually be able to talk to customers and do things like this because in the highly regulated industries, often get to do that.
Makes sense. So a wide experience. So you've been around and you see a lot. In the last few months, there has been several attacks. Actually, we reported, including here on the show, the HTTP2 vulnerability. So attacks are around, and we wrote this blog post 2 weeks ago about this Thanksgiving security incident, Thanksgiving 2023. So that was a November 2023 incident. For those who don't know, first, why did we write this blog post mentioning so specifically this incident?
Yeah, so great question, because I always think that's the first one. Why did we do this? And so, I always think about Cloudflare as being radically transparent with how we communicate. And so, as a security practitioner for my entire career, this is an interesting scenario. You have an incident, you don't want to tell anybody. Cloudflare, completely different, right? We tell everybody everything. So we tell you everything, even if we don't want to tell you, because it's part of an experience, it's part of a learning, and it's part of trust. And I think that's very key. And the amount of conversations that I've had with people about this discussion is, hey, thank you for doing this. I'm curious on how you approached it. If we sweep these all under the rug and act like they don't exist, then I think we're creating a problem in the industry. And I think the other one is, and something I think about, it's not if you're going to be attacked, it's when you're going to be attacked. But we don't often talk about this. So I'm very proud of the blog. I'm proud of the team for creating it, to be able to represent the work that we've done, the capabilities we have, and then to be able to help people. And I've had a lot of CISOs do a lot of outreach about how did you do something. And so today we can talk about some of those things.
Exactly. This in specific was a threat actor that used a previous compromise, the OCTA compromise that we blogged also about. So that was the point of entry in a sense, right?
Yeah, so the point of entry was from the previous OCTA compromise. They were able to obtain some credentials that we thought we rotated, we validated them, but they thought they were old credentials. And when we didn't, they were able to access our system. So one thing I will say just kind of up front, because it's a good point kind of coming into this, and you're showing the blog here, which is a really good blog. If you go to blog.cloudflare.com, it's out there under the Thanksgiving incident. But there was no customer data impacted, no customer configurations. This is just really meant to be an education for everybody that wants to have the opportunity to listen to the podcast, listen to the video, and watch the video or read the blog.
Absolutely. And in a sense, we published the blog post 2 weeks ago. There's this explanation here that it was when CrowdStrike completed its investigation. So we had to wait a few weeks to get things in order to share the details that we knew. And that those were a lot of details in a sense, right?
Yeah, so I think this is a key point because people ask, why did we wait so long? You're usually quicker on this, but we were performing our own investigation, and the last time we saw any evidence was on November 24th of 2023. We also wanted to bring in CrowdStrike, one of the leading organizations that does this, to validate what we found, but also to have an independent assessment so that we actually could write this in good faith to say, we've done our investigation, CrowdStrike's done their investigation. We don't find any signs of any threat actor activity. And we also didn't find any compromise of any customer credentials, any customer data, any customer configurations, any logs, any certificates. They didn't access that. And so I think that's a key thing. So when they issued the report the very next day, we came out and published the blog.
Exactly. We were mentioning before the OCTA compromise. This is the October blog post that mentions that how we mitigated at that time. Of course, that compromise, because a lot of people use OCTA, not only Cloudflare, but a lot of companies use OCTA in terms of authentication. That has an impact that could be an impact for a future to come. That was the case here, right?
Yeah, and this is what happened. We uploaded a HAR file that had session information from one of our admin accounts as part of a support case, normal traditional things that every organization does. When we uploaded, the attacker gained those access to credentials from Okta and logged into our tenant. So I always think, though, the number one thing to look for this is what we saw was a session ID without a login. And we were able to stop it very quickly. But the actor in this scenario grabbed some credentials that we thought were old. They validated, the team that were old, but they were actually live credentials that the actor used to get into the Thanksgiving accident. So, kind of a human error on our part. We changed the way that we're doing credential management from that standpoint, and actually had to see changes within the production environment and the operational environment when they were all changed.
Exactly. There's actually a mention also specifically on what the attacker was intending to do, trying to have access to a data center that was not in production in São Paulo, right?
Yeah, so let's kind of go through what we saw. I think it's a very good thing to do. So from the credentials, they actually have a service token that was able to log on from a third-party service. So couldn't be MFA'd. We used YubiKey hard tokens. Everybody in the employee has two, one for their computer and one for their mobile device. They were able, because it was a service-based service token, they're able to log in past our account, and then they got access to a separate account that had access to our Atlassian environment. And from that environment, what they did is a couple interesting things. They were looking to understand, what Cloudflare's global network, Cloudflare's infrastructure. And so what I think was very interesting about this was things they were searching for. And the one that I think is most interesting was, well, how did we respond to the last Okta incident? They looked at our Jira tickets. We used Jira for all of our ticketing system in our security operations center. And so they were looking at how to bypass, tokens, how to bypass MFA. They were looking at how do you set up admin accounts. And so the intent of what this actor was doing was using the credentials that they were compromised in the previous Okta breach, and then log into our systems. This one. There's no fault for any of the vendors that were involved. I think it was MoveWorks, Smartsheets, Atlassian. That was all Cloudflare thing. But I think when we look at this, that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to find a way to maintain persistence within our environment. So your question about Sao Paulo was that there was a new data center coming online in Sao Paulo. It was still early stages. They were building this out, and they tried to access a console server. That wasn't hardened yet because we hadn't gone through that process. They caught us in the middle of building it out, that the infrastructure wasn't ready. They weren't able to get into the console server, but we were worried based on this type of attack. There's a lot of attacks that we have seen, kind of this void typhoon type of attacks where you're targeting critical infrastructure. We returned and wiped out the console server and every piece of network gear in Sao Paulo. We returned to the three carriers, which was wonderful that they did this: Juniper, Arista, and Cisco. They examined it, and then they brought us new equipment in just to make sure there was no risk. But I think this was what they were trying to find, even in some of the searches, is what does our IP schemes look like? What does our network topology look like? Which is, from a customer standpoint, they didn't do any searches related to anything around customer data. They were looking, one, to disrupt, the global network. Two is to gain persistence and maintain a connection with us. And so I think that's a very, interesting line of thinking from an attacker, very focused on a mission to disrupt the internet.
Hmm. Makes sense. So in terms of, and before going to the attacker in specific, we replaced the hardware anyway, even without needing, which was like no stone was left unturned in a sense perspective, right?
Yeah, so we didn't take any chances with this. And I think if you look at some of the response that we did, and I think it's a very key thing, is we, RMA'd the equipment. So we got rid of the equipment, got new equipment in here. We reimaged every server, we changed every production credential in this entire organization. We segmented the QA networks. We were very thorough with what this looked like. Now, the question that we always get is, well, how in the world did you do that in 30 days? And I think that's something we're going to talk about here in a second. But and probably every CISO that I've talked to asked me that question: how did you change 5,000 credentials? How did you reimage all of your servers? And that's part of the culture of Cloudflare that's kind of native to our DNA, which is amazing.
In a sense, that was when what we called internally, and it's stated in the blog, the code red started to mitigate, not only to mitigate that specific incident, but what that incident alerted us to be more aware and worried about, right?
Yeah, so exactly right. We call it code red. So code red originates from kind of Google and saying, hey, we have a urgent emergency that we need to address to make sure that the integrity of our systems is there. And so, this was something that we talked as an executive team. We said call code red. So code red meant, on the 23rd and 24th when we called it, was that I was in charge of all resources in the company, and I had a plan, and I was going to make sure everything we did on that plan got done. And so one of the things that we did was we changed all production credentials. Well, how did we do that when you have over 5,000 credentials? Well, we have 1,500-ish engineering type resources in the organization, and we use every single person to do it. And so, if we have about 4,000 people in the organization, probably 2,000 people, maybe more, were involved in code red on doing the things that were there. There's no chance you can do just a security team to do the things that we did. There's no chance that you can do this, even if a security team organizationally says, well, we want to do a code red. It has to come from the top. Matthew and Michelle, right, from the top said, we need to do a code red. This is important. Grant, do what you need to do and get everybody involved for us to do this. And so that's what code red was. And so I always think there's kind of three things that were part of code red as well. One was our internal investigation. Anything we needed, we stopped, we pulled somebody in, and they helped us. So that was one. Two was the CrowdStrike investigation was part of code red as well. So we brought them in to do their independent assessment. And the third one was around, what are the things that we need to do to make sure our posture is right? And so not only were we, fixing the immediate problem, we were starting to look at, well, how did they actually access these things? And what should we be doing in the future? And the future is now, right? So the future was December, into November and December, to do the things that we possibly could do while we were doing this, because we anticipated another attack coming. And the only way that you can do certain things, but we wanted to make sure 100% there was no chance they were going to come back in and make sure we were secure.
And it brings also lessons for the future in terms of resilience, in terms of making sure the systems are prepared, everything is set. In those lessons learned, and you were like a CISO before, what are the lessons learned, even for other companies that you would want to highlight specifically?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and not a lot of CISOs talk about it, is precision. And so I think when you think about this, we had one service token, one account, one ACL open. they're very small things, but the attacker got them in a specific order that would allow them to do what they did. They didn't really have any other keys to the castle. Our Cloudflare Access with our Zero Trust product worked very well. Our YubiKeys worked very well. Our identity solution for how we do our internal access worked very well. But when you miss one thing or two things or three things, it counts up. And so, I think when we talk about precision, well, I want to be 95% confident that all my systems are secure. You can't think like that. It just doesn't work. You got to be 100%. And so, think about the Sao Paulo, we were building a data center and they got into it. We didn't have the right control structure because we were in the process of building it. And so, right, even that, like, how do we make sure that that is not missed? That goes in front, right? That's a change that Jeremy Hartman and I have put in place. But I think those are things that are there. So precision, like you can't miss, having, a web application firewall missing your application. Even in our API report that we talked about, the number one reasons I think is that it's the APIs that people don't know about, shadow IT APIs to get you breached. Same thing here. You got to be 100% on. So that's one I always think is very important. The second one is credentials. As we've gotten more into more B2B type transactions, APIs are I think 57% of all internet traffic. Right. Everybody has credentials. Everybody has certificates, key management. And so kind of lesson learned too is we're moving completely to short-lived certificates. And so, you won't be able to do this for everything, but, short-lived certificates that change every 4, 6, 12 hours are going to be instrumental in the future. When you say we have thousands of credentials, every organization has thousands of credentials, how do you rotate them? The answer is you don't. You put in short-lived certificates. And I think that's one that is there. And I think that is a key component. And I think the third one, and this is something that I've seen over my career, which is a focus away from moving from detection into validation. And so you don't hear this very often, but if I'm waiting to detect something, then there's something wrong with the approach that I'm doing. And so how I always think about it, how do I validate the integrity of my security versus waiting for something to be flagged? I think you still have to do the detect, but we're way too dependent on it. We need to start making sure things are completely have integrity within our environment. And so that's another big push that we're making in the organization.
Makes sense. You mentioned before, but it was having different aspects in terms of authentication, in terms of zero trust, security keys you already mentioned. So it's an ecosystem that we actually dog food some of it with us ourselves that was successful here and could be successful for others too, right?
Yeah, so that's 100% right. My team kind of owns the customer zero products for Cloudflare. So zero trust is one. I think this is an interesting one because from a remote user standpoint, and most users all are remote to data centers, unless you're actually inside the data center. The way that our product works is that you only have access to what you need. And so in the scenario of the access token and the service account, they only had access to kind of that Atlassian environment. And so there's no other way that you can kind of breach out of that environment other than trying to install something, which they tried, or escalate your privileges, which they did. And if you look at the timeline, it's pretty good to go up just a little bit. The timeline, you can see it at 1558. They did it. They escalated their account into an administrative account. And 2 months later, we got an alert, and 12 months later, we were investigating, and actually 37 minutes, it was completely mitigated. And so that's pretty impressive to where it is, but I think a lot of it is the technology that we've deployed. And so what they realized the first time when they did this, it was the same scenario. They did the same thing the first time as they did the second time. because they couldn't move within the environment. So they had to be able to find a way to gain persistence. And if we kind of go back to what they searched for was how we responded to OCTA, how to bypass MFA, how to gain access to admin accounts. And that was very, very heavily monitored. And even on Thanksgiving, which, all the US people were working, were off, but we have a global operation, and, the person that responded to it was in Europe. And so amazing thing for us to be able to pull off.
Makes sense. And we haven't discussed it yet, but do we know what type of threat actor it was?
Yeah, so this is a good question. And I think, right, we do believe, based on signs, working with a government, it's a nation state actor. I think the intent is there's a lot of different intent. There's people that are trying to disrupt critical infrastructure. I think, right, is, who actually occurred, who was the actor that was on that did the OCTA breach. And so those two things, I think, are probably different actors. And so we're working kind of with the government to figure out what this is, to look for attribution.
Makes sense. Still working on that, but it was sophisticated. So it had to be someone with resources, and in that sense.
It was, my favorite thing, and I love this because you always hear, attackers work, in a 9-to-5 job. And so what was super interesting about this is when they were doing the searches, it was a 9-to-5 job. They'd come in and, we'd see logins at 8:12 and they would leave at 4:13. And they would, hey, one day they got in a little bit later and it was 8:45 and they would leave at 3:45. They had a little short day. And so truly in this scenario, it was people working, aimed to disrupt the internet, to look at what they could do with Cloudflare. And you could see the patterns of what the actors are. So, you think attackers are always working in the middle of the night. Well, if they're a different time zone, they are working in the middle of the night, right?
True.
And so,
True.
And I think in this time zone, for the most part, was European time. And so I think as you look at it, well, I don't need to work that. If I'm trying to attack on a company in China and I work US hours, well, that's nighttime for China, right? So, I think even the actors, that they're doing, they're very well funded. They're very well, have the right mission of what they are trying to do. I think the one thing we found is, from the searches, and if you read the blog, it was looking like they were trying to disrupt, the internet, because 20% of the internet comes through Cloudflare. And I think when we look at that was the intent of where they were going. And I think that's a key kind of component of what they were doing, because that was the intent. It wasn't to steal customer data.
Makes sense. We, at the bottom of the blog post, we actually have this indications of compromise that we saw from this threat actor for others to also look into, right?
Yeah, and the one other thing on here that we didn't say in the blog, these are the IPs. You see the infrastructure with Sliver. We uploaded the malware and the virus tunnel as well. I think those are things, but those IPs were not seen by anybody. And so even from our threat intelligence, the one thing, Blake Darche on my team runs Cloudforce One, and we were working with other cloud providers. We're working with many of the government in the US institutions, and those IPs, for the first time, those IPs showed up, at least the top IP, the 126 IP. So I think as you look at this, it's this wasn't known IPs. It was completely new infrastructure, new actor. There are similarities to other actors, especially that ones that use the Sliver payload. But I think in this it wasn't, this looked to be very targeted from new infrastructure so they could be masked, because even in our telemetry, we see 170, 180 billion attacks a day, 20% of the internet, these IPs never crossed. And so, having super secret infrastructure to launch an attack like this, it was vital to that organization.
Sure, makes sense. In this case, looking also for 2024 in general, you already set some priorities: precision key management, moving to short-lived certifications. Are there other priorities in 2024 in terms of security that you want to highlight specifically?
Yeah, I think, this is a good question. A lot of people ask me. I think the first thing, and I was out at Davos at the World Economic Forum, the world of AI is becoming everything. And, I think Matthew said this best, is that AI is going to let us down in 2024. Just because everybody has all these promises. Hey, we're going to stop all these attacks. I talked to somebody that told me the company could stop attacks in 5 seconds with AI. That's just, we're not there, right? Data is important, right? People have the best data, but I think, when you get into the risks of AI, from model poisoning to model safety to how we use things, the attackers are starting to use it because we're seeing it in deep fakes. The bad thing about it is the attackers, we've created this amazing technology to be able to do deep fakes, but we can't detect it very well. And so we've seen a couple attacks in that. And I think that's going to be very relevant, especially in the light of voting, right? So 2024, there's going to be 4 billion people, more than half the population in the entire world's going to vote. Well, if I can, do a deep fake of Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and try to misrepresent to just change the vote, it's impactful. And that's not just the US, because every country in the world is going to be going through voting. And so, I think this is going to be a key thing. So, I think that's kind of the implication of artificial intelligence, but also I think what people are doing with artificial intelligence, data protection pulls up again. You can't have AI without data, and there's the data sovereignty rules and that are coming. And so one of my comments is, hey, there's a lot of talk about AI regulation, but there is already AI regulation coming. Look at what just was posted in the Wall Street Journal about, the EU rules of data, what's going on in France, what's going on in Australia, what's going on in the US, what's going on in Singapore. You can't move your data outside of those countries. So how are you going to have good models with test and train data? And so I think that's going to be a very interesting component. And then one thing that I've been very involved, I've done a lot of discussion about the rapid reset vulnerability that we helped find and pioneer with what that looked like. And so you're seeing a different mix of DDoS attacks.
That was late summer, right? August, September, with the HTTP2 protocol, large DDoS attacks at the time. Never before seen, actually, right?
Never, seen. It was a flaw in the protocol where you could actually you could send as many resets, and it would just create a high volume of packets per second or messages per second. And so it was a very creative way to exploit a bug, or a flaw in the protocol itself. And so I think what you're seeing is, and we've seen this with a lot of attacks, is, they're looking at, layer 7 attacks, and they're changing it up. They're not just throwing HTTP2 rapid resets, they're actually throwing large packets to see what you can actually handle. We've even seen some attacks, layer 3, layer 4, and layer 7, right? And so you see things in this environment that it's not just, hey, we're just going to DOS you on layer 7. We're going to look at your systems, where you route traffic, and how do we mitigate it. And so I think this change in DDoS is going to be important. And whether it's for ransom is one thing. We're starting to see the uptick of ransom, but to go after people during critical hours of operation, I want to disrupt business. So I want to disrupt an exchange market. I'm going to do it 10 minutes before market close or market open, where you can't make these trades. And so the intent is always key to understand why people do it. Somewhat money, somewhat destruction. And so I think those are two ways to kind of look at it. But in this DDoS world, right, is you're starting to see attacks. And so when you start to look at, like, how do I have a good mitigation plan to address that, I think is very key, because I always think about it in kind of threes. Like, you got DNS traffic, you got layer 3 kind of 4 network traffic, and you got web traffic, which would include web applications as well as APIs. And so making sure you have your kind of protocols lined well is going to be very key, because we're seeing those attacks ramp up.
Makes sense. And in this show, we've seen before, sometimes attackers simply use one method to try to hide another vulnerability they're exploring. Sometimes a DDoS attack is just to occupy IT sections of a company to try to use another vulnerability. So hackers are being creative in different types of vectors of attacks, right?
Yeah, and the other one is, it's very easy to understand what your defenses are in this world, because you can trace route to see, did it route a different way? Where is your traffic going to a data center, you can test it. And so we're seeing a lot of that to occur. Like it's reconnaissance. It's, MITRE 101. What can I do to you? And they'll find out, your weakest links and test it. And then when they're ready, they'll launch an attack of something that they think you're not ready. So, it's super interesting, things that everybody should be paying attention to.
For sure. For sure. That's our time. Thank you so much, Grant. Hope you liked it.
This was wonderful. Have you back anytime. I enjoyed it, and great to be here.
Actually, we're going to have some news, Security Week news in a few weeks. So maybe you will be returning in a short period of time.
I bet I will be. This will be exciting.
See you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. And we're back to do a quick run through of some of the other blog posts and announcements we did since January 2024. So here is the Cloudflare blog. By the way, you can browse through the different tabs: product news, IP reliability, security, serverless, zero trust, developers, deep dives, and also live at Cloudflare. Feel free to browse through those tabs on top of the blog. One of the highlighted blog posts of this week is that Cloudflare defeated the patent troll Sable at trial. So it was last Thursday, a clear sunny morning in Waco, Texas. A jury returned a verdict after 2 hours of deliberation, and the jury found that Cloudflare did not infringe the patent asserted against Cloudflare about patent trolls, Sable IP, and Sable networks. This all goes back to Project Django. Cloudflare has been for almost 7 years now trying to mitigate patent trolls. So Project Django tries to do just that. So it gives an award prizes to those who participate in the project that tries to help stop the trolls through prior art that invalidates their patents or claims. So some patent trolls, let's call it like that, they try to use old and vague sometimes patents to get some money from companies, and this project tries to mitigate that. We also this week had a Super Bowl blog post, a look at internet traffic trends about, for example, ads and what happened during the halftime. Going back, for example, to developers specifically, this is a tab for developers. We also this week announced that Cloudflare Zeraz ecosystem is expanding. So we explained how you can now connect with certified Zeraz developers to help you with migrating to Zeraz, maintaining your configuration, and more. In the past month or so, we've been also adding new LLMs, text classification, and code generation models to Workers AI catalog for those who are building AI stuff using Workers AI. There's also LangChain support for Workers AI, Vectorize, and D1. And also we introduced Foundations, our open source Rust service foundation library. So that's the news on the developers front. On the zero trust front, we're announcing a series of updates to our SaaS platform, Cloudflare One, that further the promise of a single vendor SaaS architecture. And this actually was a first-time report we introduced early in January 24 API security and management report. There's some metrics you can find here, very specific ones. For example, there's difference between approaches. We found that 30% more API endpoints through machine learning based discovery. So there's some numbers here that you can expand and check it out if you want, including common API errors. More on the blog front, we have this deep dive about the Connect implementation for TCP in Linux, very technical if you enjoy those. And there's also this blog post about cyber attacks targeting Jewish and Holocaust educational websites that surged in 2023. And we also have from 2024 an overview of Cloudflare's logging pipeline if you want to learn more about that. The first blog of this year was actually one related to the Privacy Pass protocol. We upgraded to the latest protocol version. This is something really important to different things that Cloudflare is doing, including on the captchas front, trying to end captchas. And next week, potentially, we're going to talk with Thibault that wrote this blog post about this topic. So that's the run through of the blog, and that's more than 1 month of blog posts. Now, this week, Innet is back, so see you next week.